So I saw kind of today a bunch of headlines covering kind of the ratings and the declining ratings for the Netflix editions of Raw over this past year. You know, with the AJ Lee return and the follow up of her being on Raw, I think it drew like 2.6 million globally, and a lot of the headlines have been kind of talking about how that's like a historically low number, which it is, you know, in a technical term, you know. And I always thought it was weird that TV ratings were so prominent, I guess, in terms of like wrestling analysis for the fan. I think during maybe like the Monday Night Wars in that era, where there was like a direct correlation to the success of said companies, right? And maybe your favorite one you wanted to see prosper. I can get that, but we're in a kind of a different era now with a lot of the product, that there's not really necessarily a direct competition between the two companies, but people use like a lot of metrics and stuff like that to justify maybe their like of a product or why certain things are going a certain way. I feel like a lot of the times, especially a lot of the extreme tribalism you see kind of online with wrestling, doesn't really translate to real life, where most of the fans are there just in the moment to have a good time. That's another thing to really pay attention to is I feel like sometimes WWE does two things, and that's like trying to maneuver through that online rhetoric and, you know, gauge what the fans who are paying and buying to see people are saying, because both those metrics do make up that ratings number. It's crazy, but there are people who actually spend more time not even watching the regular show, but watch like people like us critiquing it online. Like they might have had an interest in the product for like a couple of years, right? And then eventually maybe found a couple of personalities that was covering the product that they used to follow even more over watching the week to week product. And like I think there are a lot of factors for that, especially with like the time slot of wrestling. You know, having a 3-hour weekly show is already a huge commitment, you know what I mean? So, you know, in our growing lives, when you do get older, it's hard to keep up with wrestling. But I think the phenomenon of wanting to keep up with it and interested in the product, but not necessarily engaged with the legit bell to bell or in ring storytelling is very common in wrestling, unfortunately, you know. So it's like with something with WWE, with a huge portion of the fans that are like watching and also in tune to that thing, it's kind of hard for them to navigate that properly, you know, in a way that doesn't disappoint everybody. AEW's like birth, for example, was kind of like based on the complacency that WWE kind of had for its talent, you know what I mean? I think a lot of people think it's more of like AEW is an answer to Vince's programming of wrestling, but it's not that necessarily. I always thought AEW was another avenue for wrestlers to genuinely just you know, perform their pro wrestling. Is it going to be the opportunity for everyone that people think it is? No, it's just another prominent promotion that exists now to give wrestlers that option, you know what I mean? And it brings wrestling back to TNT, which is a place that had wrestling, and TBS that had wrestling, you know, in the past. So I think it's kind of beyond the whole like, oh, you know, we need it to be free from wrestling, because I just think that the constant negative narrative around wrestling was born out of like an era where the main product was so bad for so long, where now people's normal reaction is to talk about how low and how bad things get, even when things are, by comparison, in the Triple H era, a lot better than they ever really were in that, you know, mid 2000s to late 2010s Vince. I think people really kind of underestimate how bad that whole era was, and how certain factors, depending on where you were watching at the time, made it different. Like if you were maybe an NXT fan, it was great, you know, until you watched anything with the main roster, or maybe you just were sitting there suffering, complaining about, you know, Raw every week. I think that sentiment still kind of bleeds over into any, like even in our channels when we discuss like what possibly can be better, it's never like, oh, the current product is bad. It's that I'm so engaged in this that these are like the fantasy bookings that I can see things going through. That's an indication of like I'm thinking about what's happening because it's engaging. And I haven't been able to have that, I think, specifically with WWE really since the Triple H takeover. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm that's why I even started covering it, because I felt like there was a lack of, besides people like CVV and stuff like that, I feel like the discourse online is always negative surrounding WWE. And like I will call them out on like the corporate stuff, but like, to be honest, I feel like since 2022, like, yeah, there are some stalling moments on television, but to really say like, oh, Vince would have not had the ratings that are happening now, he would have, it's so like disingenuous, and like it reeks of people just only knowing how to complain instead of actually legitimately having a problem with the product. AEW, I don't cover too much AEW because I've watched primarily WWE, and my indie stint and stuff like that was with New Japan and ROH. So kind of when AEW kind of came about and kind of cannibalized that, I just kind of, and I wasn't going to be paying into the pay-per-views, unfortunately. I just respectfully was like, I can't watch the product, you know, if it's going to be priced like that. With that being said, I still don't understand why there's the need to, when people are covering wrestling, it's always comparisons. It's always comparison battles, and never like giving each other company credit. There's always like these anti-WWE people or anti-AEW people that even disparage the talent when they, you know, wrestle for other promotions. It's become so personal for like fans sometimes that it's kind of like, it's kind of like disgusting. I mean, like, I think especially for some of the female wrestlers, like they've had, well, even Seth Rollins too, a lot of the regular wrestlers have had people who genuinely mentally ill and then take these things like too far, you know, because I think so much of the online rhetoric, it permeates in people's minds, and it allows people to have this conversation for hours and hours on end. So it like just takes over kind of everything. I think it becomes no longer like, oh, what type of wrestling do I like, but people just like imparting, feeling kind of superior over other people in terms of like, oh, well, I watch this, so like, what are you doing watching that? The wrestling is like ice cream, I think MJF said, right? There's a bunch of different flavors, and the fact that people kind of sit here and want a moral grandstand, like the fake melodramatic fighting, to me is kind of crazy. And I think, you know, stuff like, or headlines talking about the TV ratings, what in reality does that mean for what we watch week to week? Like, does that mean, oh, the storylines are going to change rapidly? No, we've been in times where Raw drew half those viewers. It's obvious that I feel like a lot of times there's a narrative that's trying to be played that kind of downplays the legitimacy of the work that's been done, and will try to like just kind of paint people in certain ways, or like paint sometimes WWE as like this villain against the rallying AEW, or AEW is just a crazy mud show where WWE is an actual, like, it's just like, it feels so ridiculous, you know, because like I don't feel like fans would really in any other industry care as much about the internal company politics. Who cares about the ratings or what other people think about a match, you know, especially if you're not going to listen to what they have to say about the match, but you just care about that numerical value and not their actual editorial notes on the actual match. If people were taking, for example, Dave Meltzer's quotes and going, okay, so this quote he said about this spot and like what he thinks about these spots in general, I hate that. But they don't. People just see like, oh, he gave Omega and Okada like 7 out of 5, and they go, why? What about the system? His systems are, but it's like they just see that a man has essentially overrated a match, right? And that's it. There's no context to that. And it's like, and I don't know what you want. It doesn't seem like you actually want to engage with the discussion of whether or not the match is the greatest of all time, but you just have a problem that someone like thinks that, which says more about someone gatekeeping just what they enjoy than like, you know, or being offended by other people's opinion. You know what I mean? That's insane. Like what you watch isn't an indictment on your personal character in terms of like everything, you know, like because you watch WWE doesn't mean like you can't enjoy like great 5-star wrestling. Just because you watch AEW doesn't mean like you don't appreciate a great, you know, overbooked program, you know what I mean, that has a lot of soap opera moments, which both companies do at certain points, like interchangeably. It's why do we care about ratings? It makes no sense. We should care about wrestlers have more autonomy now. Wrestling is probably as popular as it's ever been, actually, in terms of global audience, and in terms of different ways you can enjoy it and streaming avenues and options, right? So why are we sitting here going, damn, everything's going down the drain like every couple of months just because like maybe a Cena heel turn wasn't too hot? Let me know what you guys kind of think about that.